My husband and his mother spent 2 years making me feel like I was losing my mind. They moved things around the house, denied conversations that happened, and told everyone I was mentally unstable. When I finally left, they spread rumors that I'd had a complete breakdown. 4 years later, I walked into their family's company anniversary gala as the keynote speaker they'd hired, and watched the color drain from their faces when they realized they couldn't run from what they'd done. The gaslighting started so gradually I didn't recognize it for what it was. Small things at first. I'd leave my keys on the kitchen counter and find them in the bathroom drawer. I'd set my coffee mug on the table and it would vanish, only to reappear in the dishwasher. I'd mention a conversation my husband and I had the night before, and he'd look at me with concern and say we'd never discussed that topic. "Honey, are you feeling okay? We didn't talk about visiting your parents. Are you sure you're not mixing up dreams with reality?" I was 34 years old, working as a marketing consultant for small businesses, and I'd always had an excellent memory. But after 6 months of these incidents, I started keeping a journal just to prove to myself I wasn't imagining things. Then my mother-in-law moved in. My husband said it was temporary. His mother had sold her house after his father's death and needed somewhere to stay while she found a new place. That was supposed to be 2 months. It turned into 2 years. From the day she arrived, things escalated. I never said I'd cook dinner tonight. I'd tell my husband after coming home to find his mother had already prepared a meal, looking at me with disappointment. "We talked about this yesterday. I was going to make pasta." My husband would shake his head slowly, exchanging a worried glance with his mother. "We didn't talk about dinner, sweetheart. Mom offered to cook because you've seemed so scattered lately." Scattered. That became the word. Scattered, forgetful, confused, not quite right. I heard it so often it started to feel like my name. My mother-in-law would rearrange my kitchen cabinets and act bewildered when I couldn't find anything. She'd throw away items I needed and claim she'd never seen them. She'd tell me about plans we'd supposedly made together that I had no memory of making. "Don't you remember? We discussed this last Tuesday. You agreed to let me redecorate the guest room." I didn't remember. Because it never happened. But how do you prove a conversation didn't occur? The worst part was watching my husband side with her, every single time. Not with malice, but with what looked like genuine concern. He'd hold my hands and look into my eyes and suggest maybe I should see someone. A therapist. A doctor. Anyone who could help me figure out why I was struggling so much. I started to believe them. That's the thing about gaslighting. It works because you trust the people doing it. My husband had been my rock for 8 years. Why would he lie? His mother had welcomed me into the family with open arms. Why would she manipulate me? The answer had to be that something was wrong with me. I made an appointment with a psychiatrist. I underwent cognitive testing. I had blood work done to check for early onset dementia, thyroid problems, vitamin deficiencies. Everything came back normal. The psychiatrist said I seemed perfectly healthy, perhaps a bit anxious. But that was understandable given my concerns. When I told my husband the results, he nodded slowly. "Well, that's good, I guess. But the symptoms are still there, aren't they? Maybe we need a second opinion." That's when something shifted in my mind. A tiny crack in the foundation of trust I'd built my marriage on. He wasn't relieved that I was healthy. He was disappointed. I started paying closer attention, not to myself but to them. I installed a small voice recorder in my purse and left it running during family conversations. Not because I was paranoid, but because I needed to know if I was truly losing my mind or if something else was happening. 3 weeks of recordings revealed everything. I listened to my mother-in-law tell my husband about moving my car keys to the bathroom. I heard him laugh and ask if I'd noticed yet. I heard her describe how she deleted calendar reminders from my phone when I left it charging in the kitchen. I heard them discuss which family members they'd already convinced I was having problems. My husband's voice on that recording still haunts me. My cousin asked if she should reach out to offer support. I told her not to, that it might make things worse. I said the doctors are still trying to figure out what's wrong. There was nothing wrong with me. There never had been. I sat in my car in a grocery store parking lot, listening to my husband and his mother systematically plan my psychological destruction, and felt something inside me turn to steel. I didn't confront them that night, or the next night, or the night after that. Instead, I made copies of everything, downloaded my phone records showing no deleted calendar events on my end. Retrieved security camera footage from our garage that showed my mother-in-law moving my car keys. Compiled screenshots of texts between my husband and his family members where he described my deteriorating mental state. I also discovered why they were doing it. My husband's family owned a successful commercial real estate company. His grandfather had built it from nothing. The company had a policy that ownership shares could only be held by family members of sound mind and stable character. When my husband and I married, I'd been given a small percentage of shares as a wedding gift from his late father, a gesture of welcome into the family. Those shares were now worth over $2 million. If I divorced my husband while appearing mentally stable, I'd keep my shares. If I was deemed unfit, if enough family members believed I'd had a breakdown, those shares would revert to the family trust. My mother-in-law had been orchestrating this from the moment her husband died, and she realized how much money was at stake. My husband had chosen his mother and his inheritance over me. On day 47 of my documentation, I packed one suitcase while they were out for lunch. I left my wedding ring on the kitchen counter with a note that said simply, "I know what you've been doing. My lawyer will be in touch." Then I drove to my sister's apartment 2 states away and didn't look back. The fallout was immediate and predictable. Within 24 hours, my husband had called everyone we knew to express his deep concern about my sudden departure. He painted a picture of a woman in crisis, fleeing without explanation, clearly in the grip of whatever mental illness had been affecting her for months. His mother called my parents to share her heartbreak over my breakdown. But I'd prepared for this. My sister helped me send a carefully worded email to everyone in my contacts, along with selected audio clips and documentation. Not accusatory, not dramatic. Just facts. I want you to hear the truth before you hear their version. The responses were mixed at first. Some people believed me immediately. Others weren't sure what to think. But the evidence was undeniable, and slowly, the narrative began to shift. My divorce attorney was a woman named Patricia Chen who specialized in cases involving financial abuse and manipulation. When I showed her my evidence, she smiled the kind of smile that made me understand why people feared her in courtrooms. "They planned this for over 2 years, she said, flipping through my documentation. "They coordinated it, documented it, involved family members, and created a paper trail designed to strip you of assets. This isn't just grounds for divorce. This is fraud." The legal battle took 18 months. My husband and his mother fought every step of the way, but they'd made a critical error. They'd been so confident in their plan that they'd been careless. Texts and emails and recordings don't lie. And judges don't appreciate being presented with evidence of systematic psychological abuse. I kept my shares. I also received a significant settlement for emotional damages. My mother-in-law was removed from any involvement in family business decisions after the extent of her manipulation came to light. Several family members who'd believed her stories about my instability publicly apologized when they learned the truth. But the best part of those 18 months wasn't the legal victory. It was discovering who I was without them. I'd spent 8 years in a marriage where I'd slowly learned to doubt myself, to seek validation, to question my own perceptions. Even before the active gaslighting began, my husband had been subtly undermining my confidence for years. I just hadn't seen it. Now, I saw everything clearly. I started writing about my experience, first as therapy, then as a way to help others recognize the signs I'd missed. A friend who ran a women's business network asked me to speak at their annual conference. I was terrified, but I said yes. That speech changed my life. Women approached me afterward in tears, sharing their own stories. Some were still in relationships like mine. Others had escaped years ago but never fully processed what happened. They thanked me for giving words to their experience, for validating what they'd been through. I started speaking more. At conferences, corporate events, women's groups, mental health organizations. I developed workshops on recognizing manipulation and rebuilding self-trust. I wrote a book that became a quiet bestseller in its category. 4 years after leaving my marriage, I was running a successful consulting business focused on workplace psychology and personal resilience. I'd spoken at Fortune 500 companies, been interviewed on podcasts with millions of listeners, and helped more people than I could count recognize the signs of psychological abuse. I was also genuinely happy. Not the performative happiness of my marriage, where I smiled to avoid conflict, real happiness. The kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are and refusing to apologize for it. I'd built a life that was entirely mine. When the email came from Henderson Family Holdings requesting my availability for their upcoming 50th anniversary gala, I almost deleted it as spam. Then I read it more carefully. Henderson. My husband's family name. The company whose shares I still owned, though I'd had nothing to do with their operations since the divorce. They were celebrating 50 years in business and wanted a keynote speaker to address their employees and partners on the theme of resilience and growth. My speaking agency had submitted my information months ago. The event planners had selected me based on my credentials and reputation. Apparently, no one had connected the dots. I sat with that email for 3 days. Part of me wanted to decline. Why invite trouble? Why risk reopening old wounds? I'd moved on. I was happy. What was the point of walking back into that world? But another part of me, the part that had survived 2 years of systematic psychological torture, knew exactly what the point was. They tried to erase me. They tried to make me disappear, to paint me as crazy, to take everything I had and leave me with nothing but self-doubt. And I'd won. Not won in the petty sense of revenge or getting even. Won in the sense of becoming everything they'd tried to convince me I couldn't be. Won in the sense of building a life so full and meaningful that their approval had become irrelevant. Showing up at that gala wouldn't be revenge. It would be proof. Not for them but for me. Proof that I could walk into any room, including ones they occupied, and know exactly who I was. I replied to the email confirming my availability. The Henderson Family Holdings Gala was held at the Grand Meridian Hotel downtown, a venue I'd been to once before for a company Christmas party during my marriage. Walking through those gilded doors 4 years later felt like entering a parallel universe. I arrived early, as I always did for speaking engagements, to test the microphone and review the room setup. The event coordinator met me in the lobby, a young woman with a clipboard who had no idea about my history with the Henderson family. "Miss Mitchell, we're so honored to have you. The Henderson family specifically requested someone who could speak to overcoming challenges and building resilience. Your book has been circulating in their executive offices for months." The irony was so thick I almost laughed. My book about surviving psychological abuse, circulating among the people who'd orchestrated it. "I'm looking forward to it," I said, and meant it more than she could possibly understand. The ballroom was elegant in that old money way that never quite felt comfortable to me, crystal chandeliers and white tablecloths and enough flowers to stock a funeral home. Guests began arriving around 6. Men in dark suits and women in designer dresses, the same social ecosystem I'd once tried desperately to fit into. I spotted my ex-husband before he spotted me. He was standing near the bar with a woman I didn't recognize, probably his new wife or girlfriend, laughing at something someone said. He looked older than I remembered, softer around the edges, less like the man I'd married and more like his mother. His mother. She was there too, holding court at a table near the stage, surrounded by family members who hung on her every word. The matriarch. The woman who tried to destroy me for $2 million. I was reviewing my notes backstage when the event coordinator appeared again, looking slightly flustered. "Miss Mitchell, I just wanted to let you know, there seems to have been some confusion. A few family members didn't realize you were the speaker tonight, and they're a bit concerned about potential awkwardness. Apparently, there's some history?" I looked at her calmly. "There is. But I was contracted to speak here tonight and I intend to honor that contract. If the Henderson family would like to cancel, they're welcome to do so and pay the cancellation fee. Otherwise, I'll be on stage in 20 minutes. She nodded uncertainly and disappeared. No cancellation came. At exactly 7:30, the master of ceremonies introduced me. I walked onto that stage with my head high, wearing a simple black dress and the quiet confidence of a woman who'd learned her own worth the hard way. The moment my face appeared on the screens flanking the stage, I watched my ex-husband's wine glass slip from his hand. It shattered on the marble floor, red liquid spreading like a wound. His new companion looked at him with concern, then followed his gaze to the stage, clearly confused. His mother's face went white. Pure, bloodless white. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. Her hands gripped the tablecloth so hard I could see her knuckles from the stage. For one crystalline moment, our eyes met. I smiled, not a triumphant smile or a vindictive one. Just a smile of acknowledgement. "I see you. You see me. We both know exactly what you did, and we both know how it ended." Then I began my speech. I didn't mention them by name. I didn't need to. I spoke about recognizing manipulation, about the courage it takes to trust yourself when everyone around you is telling you you're wrong. I spoke about the long road to recovery, about building something meaningful from the wreckage of betrayal. I spoke about resilience not as bouncing back but as growing forward. And I told my story, the universal version of it that audiences everywhere connected with. The slow erosion of self-trust. The moment of clarity. The painful process of rebuilding. The people who try to make you invisible, I said, looking directly at my former mother-in-law, are betting that you'll stay that way. They're betting that you'll believe what they tell you about yourself. They're betting that you'll never find the strength to prove them wrong. The room was silent. I could feel several hundred people leaning forward, hanging on every word. But here's what they don't understand. The very cruelty that was supposed to break you can become the foundation you build your freedom on. Not because you're seeking revenge. Not because you want them to suffer. But because surviving something designed to destroy you changes you. It teaches you exactly how strong you really are. I paused, letting the words settle. The best revenge isn't destruction. It isn't making them pay. The best revenge is becoming so completely, authentically yourself that their opinion of you becomes irrelevant. It's building a life so full of meaning that you can walk into any room, even ones they occupy, and feel nothing but peace. When I finished, the applause was thunderous. Not because my speech was particularly brilliant, but because it was true, and truth has a frequency that resonates with anyone who's ever been broken and had to put themselves back together. I stepped off the stage and was immediately surrounded by people wanting to shake my hand, share their own stories, thank me for my honesty. I navigated these conversations with practiced grace, always keeping one eye on the table where my former in-laws sat frozen. My ex-husband appeared at my elbow about 15 minutes later. He looked like he'd aged a decade since I'd taken the stage. "Can we talk?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "Please?" I turned to face him fully for the first time in 4 years. He looked terrified. Genuinely, deeply terrified. Not of me, but of what I represented. The truth he'd tried to bury. The woman he'd tried to erase. The evidence that still existed, that could still come out, that could still destroy what remained of his family's reputation. "We don't have anything to talk about," I said calmly. "I know you think, what happened was." He couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't bring himself to name it. What happened was documented, recorded, and presented in court. We don't need to rehash it. I've moved on. I suggest you do the same. His mother appeared beside him, her face now composed into something resembling dignity. But I could see her hands still shaking. "This is incredibly inappropriate," she said quietly, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Ambushing us at our own event. I didn't ambush anyone. I was hired to speak here. Your event planners contacted my agency. If you didn't want me here, you should have read my biography more carefully. You need to leave." I looked at her, this woman who'd spent 2 years trying to convince me I was losing my mind. "I'll leave when my contractual obligations are complete. But before I go, I want you to know something." I kept my voice low enough that only they could hear. "I don't hate you. Either of you. I spent a long time being angry. And then I realized that anger was just giving you more of my energy than you deserved. What you did was calculated and cruel, and you'll have to live with that. But I don't have to carry it anymore." My ex-husband's new companion approached tentatively. "Everything okay here?" "Everything's fine," I said, turning to her with a genuine smile. "I'm just an old friend of the family. Nice to meet you." I walked away before she could ask any more questions. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of networking and polite conversation. I watched from across the room as my ex-husband and his mother had an intense, whispered argument. I watched family members who remembered me from years ago put the pieces together, their expressions shifting from confusion to recognition to something like shame. By the time I left the hotel, several of them had approached me to apologize. Not for anything specific, but for believing what they'd been told without question. For not reaching out when I'd left. For participating, even passively, in my erasure. I accepted their apologies graciously. What else was there to do? They'd been manipulated too, just in different ways. The drive home took 45 minutes through quiet streets. I didn't turn on the radio or call anyone to debrief. I just drove in silence, processing what had happened. When I'd walked into that ballroom, part of me had expected to feel something intense, anger or vindication or the satisfaction of seeing them squirm. Instead, I'd felt almost nothing. Not numbness. Peace. They tried to make me invisible, and I'd become someone who stood on stages and helped thousands of people trust themselves again. They tried to take everything from me, and I'd built something they couldn't touch. They tried to convince me I was crazy, and I'd learned exactly how sane, how strong, how capable I really was. The best revenge wasn't the gala or the speech or watching my mother-in-law's hands shake. The best revenge was this moment. Driving home to my apartment, where my cat would be waiting and my favorite tea was in the cabinet and my life was completely, entirely my own. The best revenge was freedom. And I was finally, completely free. If this story of quiet strength and refusing to stay invisible resonated with you, hit that like button now. My favorite part was watching her walk onto that stage knowing exactly who she was, while the people who tried to destroy her fell apart. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss stories like this one.